In the shadows of crumbling castles and echoing stone chambers, the Middle Ages perfected the art of pain. Long before human rights, the Dark Ages wielded iron, fire, and fear to break bodies and crush spirits. From the bone-snapping rack to the skin-peeling flaying knife, medieval torture devices weren't just tools. They were messages carved in flesh. This was brutality not born of chaos, but crafted with chilling precision. Welcome to the grim theater of medieval cruelty. Introduction: a dark era of pain. The Middle Ages, 5th to 15th century, were marked not only by war and plague, but by a brutal justice system. Torture was often used to extract confessions, punish heresy, intimidate dissent, or demonstrate power. It was public, symbolic, and horrifying, meant to terrify others into obedience. The rack, the classic of agony. Among the most infamous instruments of medieval torture, the rack stands as a terrifying symbol of state-sanctioned cruelty. Its design was simple, yet brutally effective. A wooden frame with rollers at each end, to which the victim's wrists and ankles were bound. As the rollers turned, the body was pulled in opposite directions, stretching it beyond its natural limits. The pain was unimaginable. Ligaments tore, joints popped from their sockets, and muscles were slowly shredded apart. Prolonged use could permanently paralyze a victim or kill them through internal bleeding and shock. Yet its purpose wasn't always execution. The rack was often used to extract confessions, secrets, or names during religious inquisitions, royal interrogations, and military investigations. One of the rack's most famous victims was Guy Fawkes, who was tortured before revealing details of the gunpowder plot in 1605. The rack remains a haunting relic of an age when justice was brutal, and silence was often broken by the sound of bones snapping under tension. Iron Maiden, a sarcophagus of spikes. The Iron Maiden is perhaps the most iconic and horrifying torture device associated with the Middle Ages. Shaped like a life-sized human coffin, it featured iron spikes lining the interior. When the victim was placed inside and the doors slowly closed, the spikes would pierce the body in non-lethal places, prolonging agony without causing immediate death. Despite its gruesome reputation, the historical reality of the Iron Maiden is murky. Some scholars argue it was never actually used during the medieval period. Instead, it may have been a later invention, possibly from the 18th or 19th century, created to fuel anti-Catholic sentiment or to dramatize the cruelty of past ages for museum displays. Regardless of its authenticity, the Iron Maiden has cemented its place in the popular imagination. It stands as a chilling symbol of merciless punishment and the dark legends surrounding medieval justice. Whether real or exaggerated, it continues to the fearsome brutality once believed to haunt the dungeons of Europe. The Brazen Bull, execution by roasting. The Brazen Bull was a gruesome instrument of execution, notorious for combining psychological terror with excruciating pain. Crafted from brass in the shape of a life-sized bull, it was hollow inside to fit a human body. Once the victim was locked inside, a fire was lit beneath, slowly roasting the person alive. What made the Brazen Bull especially horrifying was its built-in sound system, tubes and pipes that converted the victim's screams into sounds resembling a bull's bellow. This ghastly feature was designed not only to mask the cries, but to turn torture into twisted spectacle. Although its origins trace back to ancient Greece, particularly under the tyrant Phalaris of Acragas, the Brazen Bull's legacy echoed into the medieval period. While rarely used in the Middle Ages, its concept influenced later methods of fiery execution and torture. reinforcing humanity's capacity for cruelty cloaked in theatrical design. Even today, the Brazen Bull remains a haunting reminder of how art, engineering, and brutality could merge into one of history's most terrifying death machines. The pillory and stocks, public humiliation and abuse. Unlike torture devices meant to maim or kill, the pillory and stocks were tools of public shame. These simple wooden frames restrained a person's hands, feet, or head, immobilizing them in a vulnerable position, often in the center of town. The punishment wasn't just physical, it was deeply social. Designed to humiliate rather than execute, these devices turned justice into a public event. Crowds gathered to jeer, mock, and pelt the captive with stones, rotten food, or even human waste. The physical discomfort was real, but the lasting damage often came from the ridicule and loss of reputation. Commonly used for crimes like theft, blasphemy, or adultery, the pillory and stocks were a reminder that punishment didn't always need blood to be brutal. They served as warnings to others and entertainment for the masses. In many ways, they were medieval society's version of public shaming, where justice was handed out in plain sight. The saw torture from groin to skull. The saw torture stands among the most horrific execution methods ever devised, designed not for justice, but for prolonged agony and psychological terror. The process was gruesomely simple. The victim was suspended upside down, legs spread, and slowly sawed in half, starting at the groin and moving upward toward the skull. This inverted position wasn't arbitrary. By hanging the person upside down, blood rushed to the brain, keeping the victim conscious and alert far longer than if they were upright. This ensured maximum suffering during the mutilation. Used as punishment for grave crimes such as heresy, witchcraft, or treason, the saw torture was meant to terrify onlookers as much as punish the condemned. It was not a swift execution. It was a brutal performance meant to instill fear and obedience. The Heretic's Fork, no sleep, only pain. The Heretic's Fork was a deceptively simple yet excruciating tool of torture, used not to break bones, but to break the will. Consisting of a metal rod with sharp prongs at both ends, the device was strapped between a victim's chin and chest, or sometimes between the neck and upper chest. The purpose was cruelly effective, to prevent even the slightest movement of the head. Victims wearing the Heretic's Fork couldn't lower their head, speak freely, or sleep. Any attempt to rest or doze off would result in the prongs piercing their flesh, keeping them in a state of constant fear, exhaustion, and pain. It wasn't the blood loss or violence that caused the most suffering. It was the psychological torment of enforced wakefulness and immobilization. This device was favored during the Inquisition, especially for suspected heretics. It didn't kill outright, but over days, it could break down a prisoner's resistance and force confessions. The Pear of Anguish, expansion from within. The Pear of Anguish is one of the most infamous torture devices associated with medieval cruelty, though its actual historical use remains debated. Crafted from metal and shaped like a bulb or pear, the device was designed to be inserted into the mouth, vagina, or anus. Once in place, a screw mechanism would be turned, causing the petals to expand outward, tearing internal tissue and causing intense pain, disfigurement, or even death. According to some accounts, the pear was used to punish specific groups: heretics, homosexuals, and women accused of witchcraft or blasphemy, targeting them with both physical torment and symbolic shame. Its use was said to reflect the church or state's intent to control both the body and soul, often through methods that inflicted maximum psychological and physical trauma. However, like the Iron Maiden, the Pear of Anguish's actual medieval use is disputed. Many historians suggest it may have been a later invention, possibly from the 17th or 18th century, and was more a product of fearsome imagination or propaganda than recorded judicial practice. Some examples found in museums may have been theatrical props or forgeries created to dramatize the brutality of the so-called Dark Ages. Crushing fingers slowly. The thumbscrew was a compact but merciless torture device designed for one simple purpose: to inflict intense, localized pain. Made of metal and shaped like a small vice, it was placed around a victim's thumbs or sometimes other fingers and tightened gradually by turning a screw. With each twist, the pressure increased until bones cracked, nails split, and nerves were irreparably damaged. Unlike larger, more theatrical devices, the thumbscrew was portable and easy to use. This made it a favorite tool for interrogators seeking quick results. It could be used in prisons, courts, or even on the battlefield, anywhere a confession, compliance, or information was needed in haste. Though small in size, its effects were devastating. Victims often suffered broken fingers, nerve damage, or permanent disability. The pain was intense enough to force many into admitting guilt, whether true or false. The thumbscrew didn't aim to kill. It aimed to dominate through suffering. In doing so, it became a symbol of how even the simplest tools can deliver the cruelest punishments. The breaking wheel, Catherine wheel, shattered limbs. The breaking wheel, also known as the Catherine wheel, was one of the most brutal execution devices of the medieval era. It consisted of a large wooden wheel upon which the condemned was tied, their arms and legs spread out along the spokes. Then, with calculated precision, an executioner would strike the victim's limbs with an iron bar, shattering bones one by one. The process was deliberately slow and agonizing. Often, the goal wasn't immediate death, but prolonged suffering. In some cases, the broken body was threaded between the spokes and left on display, exposed to the sun, wind, and animals, until death finally came from shock, dehydration, or blood loss. The wheel turned execution into a public spectacle, designed as much to terrify the crowd as to punish the criminal. Used across Europe for crimes like murder, treason, or robbery, the breaking wheel served as a grim warning. Defy the law, and your body might be reduced to fragments in front of your peers. It was not just a tool of execution, it was a weapon of fear, turning death into theater and justice into horror. Flaying, skinning alive. Flaying was one of the most terrifying and excruciating punishments in human history, a method of torture and execution that involved the removal of a person's skin while they were still alive. The process often began at the legs or back, where strips of flesh were peeled away slowly and deliberately, exposing muscle and nerve with each cut. The pain was beyond comprehension. As the body's largest organ, the skin is filled with nerve endings, making its removal unimaginably agonizing. Death rarely came quickly. Victims usually died from massive blood loss, infection, or the overwhelming shock of pain. But until that moment, they remained fully aware, experiencing every second of their brutal unmaking. Flaying wasn't just about punishment, it was about annihilation. In many cultures, skin symbolized identity. To strip it away was to erase a person's humanity, reducing them to raw, vulnerable flesh. It sent a clear message: this person no longer belonged. Society, they were nothing. Used in extreme cases, especially for traitors or enemies of the state, flaying was designed to horrify, and it succeeded. Even centuries later, it stands as one of history's darkest demonstrations of cruelty, where punishment went beyond death to destroy the very self. Burning at the stake, fire as final judgment. Burning at the stake was one of the most iconic and feared forms of execution during the medieval and early modern periods. The condemned were tied to a wooden post, surrounded by flammable material, and set ablaze, often in full view of a gathered crowd. In some cases, a merciful strangulation was offered beforehand. In others, the victim was fully conscious as the flames consumed them. This method of execution was most commonly reserved for those accused of witchcraft, heresy, or serious crimes against the church and state. It was not only a form of punishment, but a ritual of purification. Fire was seen as a divine element capable of cleansing the soul through intense suffering. The spectacle was as important as the sentence. Executions were staged in public squares to ensure maximum visibility and psychological impact. Onlookers were meant to witness the fate of those who defied religious or moral authority, reinforcing fear and obedience. The burning stake became a stage for both terror and theology. More than just death, burning at the stake represented judgment, final, fiery, and absolute. It was a brutal message carved in flame: stray from the path and face the wrath of God and man alike. The coffin torture, trapped and exposed. The coffin torture was a grim and dehumanizing form of punishment designed to confine, humiliate, and slowly destroy. Victims were placed inside a human-sized iron cage, just large enough to stand, but too tight to move. Once locked in, they were left exposed to the elements, often in public squares, where townspeople could witness their suffering. In some versions, the cage was fitted with spikes to prevent any attempt at rest or movement. More commonly, the victim was left at the mercy of nature. Birds pecked at exposed flesh, insects infested wounds, and wild animals sometimes added to the torment. Rain, sun, hunger, and thirst did the rest, turning the punishment into a prolonged, agonizing death sentence. The coffin torture wasn't just about pain, it was a performance. Displayed prominently, it served as a warning to others. Disobey the law, and you too could become a living corpse on display, used for thieves, blasphemers, and rebels. It was both punishment and propaganda. This chilling method turned the human body into a spectacle of suffering, erasing dignity and replacing it with fear. The coffin wasn't just a cage, it was a message written in iron and silence. The Scavenger's Daughter, crushing inward. The Scavenger's Daughter was a lesser-known but equally horrifying torture device from the Tudor era, notable for its brutal simplicity and crushing effect. Made of metal and shaped like an A-frame, the device forced the victim into a tight crouch, head pushed toward the knees, limbs bound together, and then compressed them inward. The result was intense internal pressure on the entire body. In contrast to the rack, which stretched the body outward, the Scavenger's Daughter worked in the opposite direction, by collapsing the human form. As the frame tightened, capillaries burst, bones fractured, and organs bled internally. Victims often emerged from the device soaked in their own blood, with broken ribs and permanent injuries. Used primarily in England during the reign of Henry VIII, this method was employed to extract confessions or punish political prisoners. It was compact, efficient, and terrifying, ideal for quiet chambers where pain needed to speak louder than words. The Scavenger's Daughter demonstrated how cruelty didn't always require fire or blades. Sometimes, pain came from turning the body against itself, folding it inward until it broke.